My name is Zoe, and I am 26 years old. If you searched for my legal name online right now, you wouldn't find much, maybe a high school yearbook photo or an inactive social media profile. But if you searched for my handle, Z.Admin, you would find thousands of forum threads, headlines in TechCrunch, and endless speculation about the identity of the elusive founder of Nexus Studios. To the business world, I am a unicorn, a coding prodigy who built a gaming empire recently valued at over $1 billion. I am the architect of the virtual worlds that millions of people escape to every single day. But to the three people currently sitting in the polished marble lobby of my headquarters, I am none of those things. To my parents and my older brother, Mark, I am a catastrophic failure. I am the lazy daughter who refuses to get a real job. I am the recluse who spends her days locked in a dark room, rotting her brain with video games while the rest of the world works. They have spent the last 5 years telling anyone who would listen that I am a lost cause, a cautionary tale of what happens when you lack ambition. They have absolutely no idea that the 70-story skyscraper they are standing in belongs to me. They don't know that the security guards they are currently sneering at, probably for not wearing suits expensive enough to impress them, report directly to my head of operations. And they certainly don't know that the chief financial officer position Mark is desperate to secure is a vacancy I oversee personally. I am watching them right now on the high-definition security feed from my office on the top floor. Mark is adjusting his silk tie, checking his reflection in the glass, looking around the lobby with a mixture of desperation and arrogance. My mother is inspecting the upholstery on the waiting room chairs with a pinched expression, as if she is afraid she might catch something from being in a childish tech office. They think they are here to help Mark salvage his career after he was quietly fired from his prestigious banking job. They think they are walking into a room full of socially awkward nerds that Mark can easily manipulate. They have no clue that they are actually walking into the final level of a game I have been designing for years, and for the first time in our family history, I am the one holding the controller. Today, the game changes. To understand why I am letting them sweat in the lobby of my own building, you have to understand the brutal architecture of the childhood I escaped. In our house, love wasn't unconditional. It was a salary paid in exchange for conformity. And in that economy, my brother Mark was the CEO, and I was the janitor. The hierarchy was absolute. Mark was the golden child, the living embodiment of everything my parents valued: status, appearance, and traditional success. He was a mid-level banker who wore Italian suits he couldn't actually afford and drove a leased BMW that he insisted on parking in the center of the driveway. To my parents, Mark was a trophy. They worshipped the ground he walked on, viewing his finance career as the only valid path to a respectable life. At dinner parties, they would brag about his important client meetings and his corner office potential, preening as if his mediocrity was their personal masterpiece. And then there was me, the black sheep, the glitch in their perfect system. Because my workspace was a dual monitor setup in a darkened bedroom and my tools were lines of code rather than spreadsheets, my passion was dismissed as a childish addiction. They didn't see a developer building complex virtual economies or a strategist leading raids with thousands of players. They saw a lazy daughter rotting her brain with video games. The disrespect was constant and physical. I remember the humiliation of being 18 years old, in the middle of a global tournament that I had spent months qualifying for, only to have the connection sever instantly. My father had stormed into my room and ripped the router plug out of the wall, silencing my pleas with a look of pure disgust. "Get a real life, Zoe!" he screamed, throwing the cable onto the floor. "Stop playing with toys and be more like your brother. Mark is out there building a future. You are just wasting electricity." They constantly weaponized Mark's image against me, asking why I couldn't be stable and respectable like him. They were so blinded by his shiny suits and corporate jargon that they missed the rot underneath. They didn't know that his stability was a facade built on maxed-out credit cards, gambling debts, and a dangerous arrogance. They thought I was the one escaping reality. But the truth was, they were the ones living in a fantasy one where Mark was the hero, and I was nothing more than a glitch to be deleted. The core of our estrangement didn't happen gradually. It happened in a single, violent instant exactly 5 years ago. I remember the date perfectly because it was the submission deadline for an indie game showcase I intended to enter. At that time, I had spent 6 grueling months building my first custom PC. I didn't ask my parents for a dime. I earned every component, the high-end graphics card, the processor, the cooling system, by boosting low-level accounts for other players online and fixing laptops for neighbors. That machine wasn't just metal and plastic to me, it was my escape pod. More importantly, the hard drive contained the only copy of Project Zero, a prototype RPG I had been coding by hand for 2 years. It was my portfolio, my art, and my future. It was a Tuesday night. I was in the living room, running a final debug on the code, when the front door slammed open at 2 a.m. Mark stumbled in, reeking of whiskey and failure. I didn't know it then, but he had just lost $10,000 on a sports bet he couldn't afford. He saw me sitting there, the blue light of my dual monitors illuminating the dark, and something in him snapped. He needed a punching bag to vent his rage, and I was the convenient target. He started screaming that I was a parasite leeching off the family while he carried the burden of success. Before I could even hit save, he lunged. He didn't just unplug the computer, he ripped the tower from the cables and hurled it onto the hardwood floor with a sickening crunch. Then, he put his foot through the main monitor. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as the screen flickered and died. 2 years of code, my entire life's work, shattered into 1,000 pieces of glass and silicon in seconds. The noise woke my parents. My father ran down the stairs, saw Mark panting and the wreckage on the floor. I expected them to be horrified. I expected them to call the police or at least yell at Mark for his violence. Instead, the silence was broken by my mother, sighing not at the violence, but at the mess. She walked to the closet, grabbed a broom, and began sweeping the shards of my life into a dustpan. She looked at me, shivering and crying on the sofa, with cold indifference. "Stop crying, Zoe," she said, dumping the debris of my hard drive into the trash can. "Mark is under a lot of pressure at the bank. You provoked him with this clutter. Maybe now that this stupid toy is broken, you'll finally go out and get a real job." That was the night the screen went black. But it was also the night I finally saw them clearly. They didn't care if I was hurt. They only cared that I was quiet. And as I looked at the broken pieces of my computer in the trash, I realized that if I wanted a future, I would have to build it somewhere else. For 2 years after Mark destroyed my computer, I scraped by. I worked double shifts at a tech repair shop, ate cheap noodles, and rebuilt my rig piece by piece. By the time I was 23, I had coded the alpha version of Nexus, the platform that would eventually become my empire. But to take it live, I hit a wall I couldn't code my way through. Server costs. I needed $10,000 for the initial cloud infrastructure to handle the anticipated player load. It was a calculated risk, but the projections were solid. I had a detailed 40-page business plan, user acquisition strategies, and a monetization model that was already showing promise in beta testing. I swallowed my pride, a bitter pill that tasted like desperation, and asked my parents for a formal family meeting. I dressed in a blazer, printed out my presentation, and laid it on the dining room table. I didn't ask for a gift. I asked for a loan, with interest, offering them equity in the company. My father didn't even open the binder. He looked at the cover page, chuckled, and pushed it back across the table like it was a dirty napkin. "Zoe," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we are not going to throw good money after bad. Virtual swords and magic coins? That's monopoly money. It's fantasy. We invest in the real world, not in your little imaginary playground." I was crushed, but I tried to accept their refusal as financial caution. I told myself they were just old-fashioned and risk-averse. That lie fell apart exactly 48 hours later. I came home from my shift to find a brand-new, cherry-red sports car gleaming in the driveway. Mark was leaning against it, grinning, while my parents circled it with looks of pure adoration. They hadn't just dipped into their savings. They had withdrawn $50,000 from their retirement fund, 5 times the amount I had asked for to put a down payment on a vehicle. Mark claimed he needed to impress high-profile clients. "Image is everything in banking, Zoe," my mother told me, beaming as she stroked the leather seats. "This is an investment in Mark's future." The silence in my chest was louder than any scream. They saw a depreciating asset as an investment because it was attached to Mark. but they saw my potential billion-dollar company as a joke because it was attached to me. That was the moment the final thread snapped. I realized I wasn't their daughter. I was just background noise in the story of Mark's success. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I went upstairs, packed a single duffel bag with my clothes and my hard drives, and left in the middle of the night while they were sleeping. I left a note on the kitchen counter that said only 2 words: investment closed. I haven't asked them for a penny since. Over the next 3 years, the gap between my reality and my family's perception of me widened into a canyon. While my parents told their country club friends that I was finding myself, their polite code for being unemployed, I was actually building an empire in a studio apartment that smelled of stale coffee and ambition. I lived on instant noodles and adrenaline, coding for 18 hours a day until my fingers cramped. I poured every ounce of my frustration into my work. The result was Etheria, an open-world RPG that didn't just succeed, it exploded. Within 6 months, Etheria had 50 million daily active users. The revenue streams turned into a flood, and Nexus Studios was born. But I learned from my past. I knew that if my family found out I had money, they would try to claim it as repayment for raising me. So, I stayed in the shadows. To the world and my employees, I was the elusive Z.Admin. To the public, Nexus was a faceless corporate entity. I bought my peace with anonymity. Meanwhile, as I was ascending, the golden child was crashing back down to earth. Mark's life was a masterclass in smoke and mirrors. The expensive suits and the sports car my parents bought him were just props hiding a rotting foundation. Mark wasn't a financial genius. He was a gambling addict. He spent his nights at high-stakes poker tables, trying to chase an adrenaline high he couldn't get at the office. When his luck ran out, he didn't stop. He started stealing. He began diverting funds from dormant client accounts to cover his losses, convinced he could pay it back before anyone noticed. He was wrong. The bank's internal auditors caught him 6 months ago. He avoided prison only because the bank was terrified of a public PR scandal. They offered him a deal: resign quietly, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and disappear. He wasn't arrested, but he was blacklisted. His license to practice finance was revoked. By last week, Mark was desperate. The repo men had taken the sports car. His credit cards were maxed out. He needed a high-paying executive role immediately to pay off loan sharks who didn't care about his family pedigree. That was when he saw the job listing for a CFO at Nexus Studios. He didn't see a gaming company. He saw a desperate lifeline. He applied, thinking he was preying on a naive tech startup, completely unaware that he was walking straight into the lion's den. Last week, the inevitable happened. Mark, bleeding cash and desperate to maintain the illusion of his success, stumbled upon the one lifeline he thought was beneath him, yet rich enough to save him. He found the job listing for the chief financial officer position at Nexus Studios. To Mark, the gaming industry was a joke. He had spent his entire life mocking my passion, calling video games digital pacifiers for children and a waste of electricity. But when he looked at the financial reports attached to our public filing, he didn't see art or community. He saw a billion-dollar valuation. He saw a cash cow that he could milk. He smelled money, and his desperation instantly transformed into arrogance. He convinced himself that a tech company run by immature nerds and hoodie-wearing coders would be desperate for a real businessman like him. He applied within the hour. But his application was a masterpiece of fiction. On his resume, he erased the embezzlement scandal that destroyed his banking career, rebranding his termination as a voluntary resignation to pursue strategic leadership roles. He listed references from colleagues who were terrified of him, betting that a gaming studio wouldn't have the connections to verify his background in the high finance world. He was banking on our ignorance. Worse, he didn't keep this quiet. He bragged to our parents over a dinner. I wasn't invited to details. I learned later through the grapevine. He told them, "I'm going to walk in there and fix that messy little tech company. These developers don't know how to handle real wealth. They need an adult in the room. I'm going to get the salary I finally deserve." My parents, of course, were thrilled. They saw this as Mark's rightful return to power, praising him for being willing to lower himself to work in the tech sector to save it. He thought he was the wolf entering a fold of sheep. He had no idea he was walking into a digital fortress I had built brick by brick. My VP of Human Resources flagged his application immediately. Our background check software is far more sophisticated than the banks he used to work for. It pinged his credit score, his gambling debts, and the sealed record of his dismissal instantly. My HR director called me, ready to send a standard rejection letter. Z.Admin, she said, using my handle. We have a candidate with a massive red flag. He's blacklisted in finance. Shall I delete the file? I looked at the name on the screen. Mark Sterling. I looked at the resume filled with lies. I could have rejected him then and there. I could have saved us both the time. But after 5 years of being called useless, I realized I didn't want to just reject him. I wanted him to see what I had built. No, I told her, my voice steady. Schedule the interview. Put him through to the final round with the board. I want to handle this one personally. At 9 a.m. sharp, the elevator doors in the lobby slid open, and my brother stepped out. But he didn't come alone. In a display of codependency that would be hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic, Mark brought an entourage. Our parents were flanking him like a security detail. I sat in my office on the top floor, sipping black coffee, watching the high-definition security feed on my second monitor. It was like watching a nature documentary about invasive species. They stood in the center of the Nexus lobby, a space designed with vibrant murals, arcade cabinets, and open workspaces, and looked around with undisguised contempt. I saw my father gesture toward a group of developers collaborating on a sofa and mouth the word playground. They didn't see innovation. They saw a lack of discipline. Mark approached the front desk with the swagger of a man who already owned the building. My receptionist, a brilliant young woman named Sarah who happens to have neon blue hair and sleeves of tattoos, smiled politely. "I'm here for the CFO interview," Mark announced, tossing his coat onto the counter as if she were a coat check girl. "And tell your boss I'm on a tight schedule." Through the audio feed, I heard him mutter to our mother, "Look at her hair. Does anyone in this place actually do any real work? Or do they just play dress-up?" My mother patted his arm. "You'll fix them, honey. They need a strong hand." While my parents settled into the waiting area, loudly complaining about the tacky furniture and the wait time, Sarah directed Mark to the executive elevator. He adjusted his tie in the reflection of the metal doors, checking his teeth, practicing his winning smile. He looked every inch the corporate shark, sleek, predatory, and completely hollow. When the elevator opened on the executive floor, the atmosphere changed. The playful decor was gone, replaced by steel, glass, and silence. My assistant led him into the main boardroom. It was a cavernous space dominated by a 20-foot mahogany table. Mark walked in, chest puffed out, confident that he was about to dazzle some inexperienced tech founder with his banking jargon. He took his seat at the far end of the table. Directly across from him, at the head of the table, was a high-backed leather executive chair. It was turned away from him, facing the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city skyline. Mark didn't find this strange. He probably thought it was a dramatic affectation. He opened his leather folio, set out his falsified resume, and cleared his throat, addressing the back of the chair. "Good morning," he projected his voice, dripping with arrogance. "I'm Mark Sterling. I'm here to take your company to the next level." He had no idea that the person sitting in that chair wasn't a stranger. He had no idea he was speaking to the parasite he had tried to crush 5 years ago. Mark wasted no time. He stood at the foot of the table, addressing the high-backed leather chair as if he were bestowing a great honor upon the room. He didn't even wait for a greeting. He launched straight into his rehearsed pitch, his voice dripping with that familiar, condescending confidence that had dominated our dinner table for 2 decades. "I've looked at your public trajectory," Mark began, pacing slightly as he gestured with his hands. "And, let's be honest, you guys have had a lucky run. But gaming is volatile. It's childish. You need a steady hand at the wheel to make sure this bubble doesn't burst." He chuckled at his own joke, a sound that grated on my nerves. "I can bring discipline to this chaotic startup. You have a lot of creative types downstairs, and that's cute, but you need a real professional to handle the money. You need an adult in the room to make sure the cash flow is managed by someone who understands real finance, not just virtual coins. I sat in silence, listening to him insult my life's work, my employees, and my industry. In a single breath, he finished his speech with a smug adjust of his tie. So, when do I start? I waited for 3 seconds. The silence in the room grew heavy, stretching until Mark shifted uncomfortably on his feet. Then, I kicked off the floor. The heavy executive chair spun slowly, 180 degrees, until I was facing him directly. I wasn't wearing a tailored suit. I wasn't wearing a Rolex. I was wearing a black hoodie with the Nexus logo embroidered on the chest, ripped jeans, and vintage sneakers. I held a can of energy drink in one hand and my tablet in the other. Mark's jaw literally dropped. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. He blinked rapidly, stepping back as if he had been physically struck. His eyes darted frantically to the corners of the room, scanning the ceiling for a hidden camera, convinced this was some kind of elaborate prank. "Zoe?" he stammered, his voice cracking into a high pitch. The shock quickly morphed into annoyance. "What the hell are you doing here? Did Mom send you to beg for a job too?" "Jesus. Zoe, I am in the middle of a serious meeting with the CEO. You can't just break into a boardroom." He pointed at the door, his golden child authority flaring up. "You need to leave, right now. Actually, wait, are you the assistant? Did they hire you to fetch coffee? Go get your boss and tell him I'm ready. I don't have time for your games." I didn't stand up. I didn't shout. I simply leaned forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table that cost more than the car he used to drive, and smiled the same cold, detached smile he used to give me when he unplugged my router. "There is no him, Mark," I said, my voice steady and amplified by the room's perfect acoustics. "And I'm not the assistant. I am the founder. Welcome to my useless empire." You might expect a man in Mark's position caught lying to the CEO who happens to be the sister he tormented to feel shame. But you would be underestimating the sheer, blinding entitlement of a man who has been told his entire life that he is the main character. The shock on Mark's face lasted exactly 5 seconds before it was replaced by a greedy, predatory grin. He didn't apologize. He didn't panic. Instead, he pivoted. This is actually perfect," Mark exclaimed, letting out a relieved laugh as he buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at me not with respect, but with the look of a man who had just found a winning lottery ticket on the sidewalk. "My little sister runs the show? Zoe, this makes everything so much easier. We can skip the interview formalities. Who better to manage your billions than your own brother? We'll keep the wealth in the family. I'll handle the accounts, you handle the coding stuff. It's a win-win." He was already mentally redecorating my office. He truly believed that shared DNA entitled him to a corner office in a company he had mocked for years. He thought he could fail upward, straight into my boardroom. I didn't say a word. I simply reached out and pressed a single key on my console. The smart glass wall behind me turned opaque, and a high-resolution projection appeared. It wasn't a welcome banner. It was a forensic background check generated by my security team. Specifically, it was the sealed internal compliance report from the bank that had just fired him. "I don't think so, Mark," I said, my voice cutting through his fantasy like a server blade. "Nexus Studios has a strict hiring policy. We don't employ liabilities." Mark froze as he read the text highlighted in red on the wall. "Termination for cause? Embezzlement of client funds to cover personal gambling debts." "I don't hire thieves," I said, standing up slowly. "And I definitely don't hire people who have a history of destroying hardware." "Hardware?" Mark stammered, his face flushing red as he realized his secret was plastered on the wall. "What are you talking about? That was one stupid computer, Zoe. Get over it. It was 5 years ago. That stupid computer contained the kernel code for the engine that runs this entire building," I replied, pointing to the skyscraper around us. "You smashed the machine that built this empire because you were angry you lost a bet. You destroyed my tools once because you didn't respect them. You viewed my work as garbage until you realized it was worth $1 billion. I will not give you the keys to the kingdom just so you can scrap it for parts like you did my first PC. You are a security risk, Mark, and your application is denied." I didn't wait for Mark to beg, and I certainly didn't wait for him to apologize. I pressed the intercom button on the table. 2 security officers, who had been waiting just outside the door, entered immediately. As they took Mark by the arms, his arrogance finally shattered into pure, ugly desperation. He didn't leave with dignity. He was dragged from the boardroom, shouting that I owed him this chance, screaming that I was ungrateful, and that I would regret humiliating him. I followed them out to the lobby. My parents jumped up from the waiting area couches, expecting to hear that their golden child had secured the executive salary they so desperately needed. Instead, they saw their son being escorted out like a criminal. When they saw me, their confusion turned instantly to rage. My mother rushed forward, her face twisted. "What have you done?" she shrieked. "He is your brother. How could you be so spiteful? You have all this money, all this power, and you can't even help your own family?" I stopped them at the turnstiles, the physical barrier between my world and theirs. I looked at the parents who had bought a car for a fraud and laughed at a genius. "I am helping this family," I said, my voice cold and final. "I'm stopping you from enabling him any further." I looked my father in the eye. "You spent 20 years telling me I was a bad investment. You put all your money, all your pride, and all your love into Mark because he looked the part. But you were wrong. You invested in the wrong child. Mark is your legacy, a legacy of debt and deception. Nexus is mine." I turned to the head of security. "Revoke their clearance. They are permanently banned from the premises." I took the elevator back up to my office alone. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the street below. I watched as 3 small figures, my parents and my brother, were escorted off the property, disappearing into the city traffic. They looked so small from up here. For years, I had been playing a game where the objective was to win their approval. I thought if I leveled up enough, if I earned enough gold, they would finally see me. But standing there, watching them fade away, I realized the truth. The game was rigged from the start. You cannot win with people who want you to lose. I had finally beaten the final boss. It wasn't my brother, and it wasn't poverty. The final boss was my own need for their validation. I sat down at my desk, the same desk built by the skills they called useless, and opened my code editor. "My name is Zoe. I am the CEO, and my game is just beginning. Thank you for watching. If you've ever had to prove your worth to the people who should have believed in you from the start, hit that like button and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what is the useless hobby you have that might just change your life? I'll be reading your stories.